Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Rewriting the Foundations. I'm your host, Macy Miranda, and for the last time, I get to welcome you to the series. I know it's quite unfortunate that we have to end now, but I'm so glad I got to give you all this information and all these opinions and thoughts with you as I've continued on these 5 episodes. And I believe we grew a lot together in understanding what, as a society, has really transpired and transfixed since the happenings of COVID-19 and the whole pandemic, as well as a scholastic affair between teachers, students, and the capabilities of their literacy levels, even going from the start of their school career to all the way to where they are now, and even myself and how that was impacted into my learning, especially given the rise in AI and the amount of fake things out in social media. It's been a trek, I think. And as well as my introduction of fan fiction to you guys, I'm sure you enjoyed our conversation, as well as Victoria, Lee, and Ayana, our whole little interview session last episode, where we really, touched on a bunch of things and a bunch of topics across the spectrum relating to this podcast series. And I feel like it really exposed and expressed what we really feel as, kind of like the middle ground of Generation Z and our view into the younger children who are still continuing their learning through middle school. And so I'm really glad that you're here now listening to this. Again, I'm going to make this episode a bit shorter for my sanity and for your sake. I said that last episode. But in this episode, I'm going to try and point towards a brighter future, towards, painting a picture on how we can sort of push past all the happenings of COVID and how we can really, all from our troubles in the learning areas and spectrums as kids and teachers on really shaping up the children who are still struggling scholastically and academically, on how we can really help them fix or adapt to their levels of understanding and comprehension for the future, so we can really have a full, more broad spectrum of how we can really prevent this from happening, or if we just have to build off this new foundation that we have just rewritten, or COVID-19 has rewritten. So going off into our first little topic here, I just want to say that preparing students for the future because of the pandemic, or all the things related to it, it requires a bunch of items to be involved. You really have to cater towards the student almost because of their lack, or their loss of in-person content face-to-face during COVID. Addressing these, word gaps and your learning gaps as the kids were in school, especially in reading and comprehension, and especially evidence-based strategies when you're going through the text. I think our point first would be that tutoring exists, and it has existed for a long time. I'm sure this is getting off topic, but I'm pretty sure it surrounds, like with the Greeks, Socrates and Aristotle, they mentored students. So mentoring and tutoring, I feel like, are interchangeable, but there is a difference between them, where tutor systems, they're really for personalized learning, and where mentoring, you're kind of teaching your apprentice what you know, versus tutoring is you're teaching them what they're supposed to know. So I think implementing more like tutoring for high dosage, for the content for the kids need, I feel like would be the most effective, because it's been around for this long, and especially given the circumstances and how much a child really can afford to put in, their effort is really dependent on that. So I'd say tutoring is what's the best option to have a, normalized or generalized way for recovering a student's academic literacy in the classroom. I also believe that if you have tutoring, that it should be small group tutoring, because again, if you have a larger classroom, or a handful of students, the teacher, or the tutor in this case, is going to be vehemently catered towards the group as a whole instead of individualized learning, to where you're really catering towards that one student at a time. So I feel like having really small groups, like maybe either one-on-one or 1 to 2 students at a time for a tutor, is going to be the most effective, so they can really work through these complicated areas where the students are struggling to really give them a better understanding. I guess tutoring also will go into like one-on-one reading, especially, I'm not sure if you guys remember like the reading level books, like with the red tag and they were numbered by like the difficulty. I feel like those, I mean, now that we look at them in high school, we're like, those are so easy, we can read all that. But when you're in the perspective of a younger student or a middle school student who still isn't understanding how to use syllables and sounding out words, long, exacerbated words with difficult spelling to the eye, and they don't know how to do it, or even just simple like sentence structure, those books really help. And I feel like having more of those in abundance for these students is going to be really good for them to really recover the sounding out of the syllables, the phonics. For younger students, it's just the connection between what you're speaking and what you're intaking with your brain and what you're seeing on paper or on surface or on your computer or whatever. It's just way better that way. And lastly, along to go of tutoring, finding the root word and understanding and teaching these children what the root word is, because root words are fundamental across English, across science, across many different other languages like Latin, which is they're derived from, and Spanish as well. So finding the root word and teaching the children the vocabulary associated with the root word is something that's going to help them exponentially. So I feel like targeting their comprehension areas in that way. I know that they already teach root words, and especially in science classes too, because it's, you have your like geothermal, you have your hydro, those type of things. But I feel like going into more specific terms so they really recognize, and when they find that root word in any book or reading or text, they can automatically assume like, hey, here's what the root word means. Can I figure out what this word is based off of it? So I feel like diving into more of that would definitely solidify their skills. And I also feel like with the turn of Generation Z, as we're coming into 2026, the end of COVID, especially because COVID caused so much like sadness, depression, boredom, and that mental health state really declined for many people through the pandemic. And I'm sure there's many cases based off experience on what I've experienced, not personally, but my sister and a bunch of my friends, they've expressed their discomfort in the pandemic. Being cooped up for all that time, it really does a number on you, and it's just not good for you physically and mentally. So as long as we're teaching these kids these items, I think it's also important to have a mental health support for them, whether it's because they're finding it difficult for themselves while they're learning all of these items, to make sure they're still going strong and to make sure they're growing with their socializations as well, would definitely strengthen their ability as an overall student and person. So I feel like that mental support for them is really important, especially nowadays when it's more normalized. And again, it's still, some conservative people do still talk bad about mental health. And again, there are the naysayers, but coming into this world, especially where we are now, is not easy, and it's hard to navigate for anyone. I believe in the future, this is definitely something that will support the children, support even the teachers too. I believe should be supported by this, or mental health support and emotional and social awareness is just really important. The mental health part does play into this, but the teacher and family partnership is really important. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in later episodes, but I had a conversation with my mother about this kind of specifically, but it's the part where the parents entrust the teachers to teach the kids not only academically but socially. And so if their student acts out in class, the parents would just disregard their students or their kids' attitude, and they would blame all responsibility on the teachers, because as the teachers, you see that kid 8 hours a day, maybe 9 hours a day if you're having extracurriculars. And so if the kid isn't comprehending social cues or anything like that, then the parents blame it on the teachers, but the teachers are like, hey, no, I'm not raising your kid. There's a difference between raising a kid and teaching a kid. And so that's where the teachers are really being, I guess, accused of failing the kid, when really it's the kid in itself and their family life that isn't supporting them. So I feel like finding a balance there, as well, I guess the community you surround yourself in as a parent and a student, how you're being involved in community. Do you go to the public library? Do you partake in maybe community events in your neighborhood? Are you meeting new faces? And even if you are, again, this is not really academic driven, but like, especially in the community, it's like you still want to have physical conversation with people. So being face to face with someone is really important for growing your speech. I feel like that's also important. I feel like we should definitely do more like speech therapy too. Not that that's specifically for people who lack, literacy skills, because I know verbal speech therapy is for people who have different disabilities as well. So I feel like having someone there to really work through that speech, even if it's like, public speaking or formal speak, like whatever it is, just talking to people, and just, it can be literally be about anything, but talking to people, especially for these kids, will really help them grow with their confidence as well as their ability to pronounce and speak formal sentences. So I think that's really important as well, being in the community and family area aspect that also helps with your academic side as a student. So I feel like that's really growth there. And finally, my last thought on something that would help these students in the future is having real world experience. And again, this kind of like touches up on what I previously said, where if you're physically talking to someone, you're growing your vocabulary, you're growing, all those skills as you're speaking to these people. But even aside from literacy, if you just go out, literally, if you go to a supermarket, if you go to a store, if you're traveling the world, even, I feel like traveling the world definitely gives you exposure. And again, some things are not always in your native language, but even seeing different languages and trying or attempting to comprehend them, or any, I guess, also physical media, the shows you're watching, the things you're seeing on social media, the stories you're reading, anything like that, if the child is intaking that, they're also helping their ability to comprehend it. And so that is really helping, their creativity skills and the developmental side of the things they're intaking, as well as then they can output it into the conversations that they're having. So I feel like that's important, but I feel like that also can, to an extent, it can also be a downfall of a child, because, in my last episode, we were talking with everyone, and we said that, being on your media and your intake on what you receive is also both a negative and a positive, because again, you're on a device, you're intaking that media online. If you're just scrolling to scroll and scroll, it's really addicting, and you're not really like intaking anything. You're just being there on the device. So I feel like it's a tricky and dangerous slope, but if we handle it correctly, and I especially think that establishing limits to technology, especially for middle school kids, is important. And I feel like that definitely should be brought back. Again, parents, I feel like, are giving their kids technology and phones way too early nowadays. And I'm not sure if that's like more of a safety concern, because they don't want their kids to be too far without a reach, in case of emergency. That's one thing. But I feel like the capabilities of that device, should they have it, should be limited. I think they should be having the most basic phone, no social media, no nothing, literally text, call, Google Maps, whatever you want, music maybe, and call it a day. And I feel like that's the best option for a child as they are becoming a more responsible, or attempting to become a more responsible person as they grow up and continue their academic career. And I feel like that's really going to help them in the long run with comprehension as well, because you're not intaking all of this negative media, and you're focusing on you and what you're capable of in school. So all in all, I think it really just all relates to our support systems for the children, and also how much effort the children put into their learning so they can grow. And I think that's the bottom line. And I think I'm going to leave that there, because I think that's perfectly wrapped up everything for how we should really strive for a better opportunity for these students in the future, as we no longer have to face the implications of COVID. Yes, COVID is still around, but it's not a pandemic anymore. It's not something that the entire world has to be afraid of. It's only now something that a few people have to be afraid of should someone become sick with COVID. But, we've evolved, we've changed, we've grown, we've seen, we came, we conquered, and I feel like we can continue to see and change and conquer if we put these establishments in order for the children so they can grow. And yeah. So, for the last time, it has been a pleasure to go on this entire podcast episode series with you. I'm so glad you have listened to me rant, especially for this being a school project. I'm really happy with how this turned out, even if I disliked the first episode the most. What? Who said that? No, but in all actuality, I really do appreciate you for listening to all these episodes. And, I hope you take something away from the words I've been spewing to you for the past 5 episodes and really reflect upon, I guess, your intake in media and reading and everything all in all, and really just see where that gets you. So, for the last time, I'm your host, Macy Miranda. This has been Rewriting the Foundations. Thank you so much for coming along and talking about this literacy rate epidemic with me. And I hope to see you again in the future someday. Maybe, who knows? Signing off. Goodbye.